Hi everybody, Geraldine Rose. Have you had a pretty card and you just think it needs a little bit more? Let's look at a couple of ways. It recently was World Kindness Day. Several of us over at the Crafty Chat group on Instagram decided that'd be a perfect time for an impromptu hop, because that's what we do. Our hobby is about spreading kindness one card at a time, right? I had just recently been able to get myself a little bit of Christmas presents. This Altenew Sweet Harvest bundle set was wonderful for this. I grabbed it out. This is the first time I'm using it. I stamped it down with a couple of the Altenew inks and brought that up. It has a bunch of stencils with it too. Grabbed the stencils out. I started coloring it in, and I was first using the remainder ink that was left over on my blending brushes. You can see that I'm just doing this in the background using a little bit of a gradient with that ink. The leaves that are farther away from you, you're going to want them to be lighter and more muted because perspective, right? That things that are farther away in the distance are of that aspect. That's why I deepened up the ones in the front with the green inks. Then I switched to the apples. We go in with the lighter colors first, and I deepen around the edges so that you can give that roundness to the apple with the shading, but the same thing that the two that I've got in the back that I'm doing of lighter tones. These other two stencils that were in the set, I was surprised about this. I wanted this bundle mainly because of the apples and the pie that are in it, because myself and a few of my friends from my era, we still do home cooking, and I thought it would be very apt for sending out cards to people. At first, I thought I would rotate that stripy stencil 90 degrees. It would give it a gingham effect. And I thought, no, wait. Bring in the smaller strip one and use it so that it creates a lattice top, because, lattice top apple pies, right? Deepen that up around the edges with some raw amber. That's going to give it that kind of homey feeling, a warm kitchen. And you can see I've got the three main colors going on. We've got a yellow, a red, and a green. I brought in some more yellow, the fresh lemon, to give the apples a little blush, because when you see them off the trees and in your kitchen, they've got that little hint of yellow on. We'll use some anti-static powder. I used that instead of heat setting the ink because there's a possibility then that you can warp the panel. We still have to stamp down the sub-sentiment. For that, I'm using the Distress Oxide inks, Vintage Photo. It's a hybrid style of ink, so it has properties of both pigment and normal ink, and the embossing powder sticks really well to it. So you can see I gently pushed that sub-sentiment down rather than squishing it the way that I usually do. We'll bring out the Altenew Rose Gold powder. Very pretty color. Not quite gold in your face and not quite pink. I'm pouring it back into the jar directly, and then here. This never gets old. I think this is the thing that gets all of us addicted to crafting, is watching embossing powder melt. Now, as I said, this is the first time I've used this stamp set. So here I'm just rubbing off some of the film that's left over from manufacturing. And this is going to be our main sentiment. So we've got some craft paper out that we've put anti-static powder on. We're using scorched timber in the oxide ink this time. We'll stamp this one down. I think I had to give it another go just to make certain that I had that sentiment down there well enough. Flip her back over again. That's our stamp wheel. That's the original one. This time we're using some Ranger copper powder on this because we wanted this sentiment as the main one, the main focal point, to stand out quite a bit more. We'll pour that back into its jar, tap it off, check it, and again, heat emboss it, and you want to move across it so that you don't overmelt your embossing powder into your paper. You can see the anti-static powder still on here too. Now, I did wait in between here. There was a time lapse. I was checking to make certain that it was dry, and then used microfiber cloth to buff it off. We'll get the die set out. I did buy the accompanying die set to this. Great for doing out your sentiments. I've got it set into place with some low tack tape, just checking how it's going to look on that top 1/3 center point for our composition. Now, this embossing folder that's in here, and sorry about the focus, my very expensive camera decided to not work properly for a few seconds. Anyway, around the edge, some Versamark. on this folder that's in here. It has denim patches on it, beautiful texture. And I thought I'll use some of the Ranger embossing glazes on here. You could just leave it at that stage with that very warm lattice or gingham effect in the background. But I wanted to step it up, and I wanted to make it look like it had cinnamon or spice sprinkled all over these apples on the off chance that maybe we were still going to put a pie on it. I brought out the tattered rose and the crackling campfire and the rusty hinge. I'm sprinkling them all on. Just a pinch of this, a pinch of that. That's how I cook too. I never measure anything. I just put it on until the whispers of my ancestors tell me to stop. We're going to heat emboss that embossing glaze first. And I'm still going to step this up another level. Here I'm just checking to make certain that I've set all the powder that is around the edge that was stuck to the Versamark. We're going to get out that lattice stencil back again and the Altenew embossing paste. We're going to put just a little bit in the corners and then a fifth spot because I like to do odds. It's much more pleasing to your eye. I did bring the fifth one back in after. Now we have to do this in 2 stages to get the crisscross effect. So here's the first level, and of course you'll sprinkle a little embossing glaze on it as well. I also brought in back some of the rose gold embossing powder, just more so into the corners to get a burnish look to it. We're just layering it up again with the next one to bring the crisscross part in. Of course, I'm putting the lid back on my powder because, ask me how I know to put the lid back on the powder before I do the next step. Anyway, heat embossing again. So it's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, building it up a little bit until you get to the stage where you want. Now, that center big sentiment, I wanted it to look a little bit more like cinnamon. This was my brilliant idea at this stage in the game, and to make that embossing stand out a bit more. So I brought in the mocha and put a little bit of that around the edges, blended it on. All right, on the layering guide on the back of this set, you can see some suggested colors they've got there. I followed those for the first time that I'm using this die set. This creates the apple, the slice, and the cinnamon sticks. To cause a little bit of shading around them, you can see I brought in my blending brushes from my side caddy, and I'm just putting some browns on the red and a pink blush in the middle of the apple, and then some browns as well on the cinnamon sticks. Gluing them all together. All right, we're doubling up the sentiment as well. Now we're going to set things into place. I have this at that top 1/3 and centering it for the composition. You want to take your third points, top to bottom. It actually helps draw your eye around a little bit better. I set a cinnamon stick and just kind of as a like accent line underneath that. So we'll jump to the inside of the card now. Pulled out the raspberry sunset again first, and then the espresso. As I said, brown goes really well with the res for deepening its shadows very warmly. Put it on and then blended it out. I used crimson for the little teeny friend sentiment at the bottom, deepened it with a bit of the raspberry sunset. And raspberry sunset is also the one that I'm going to use for the custom stamp on the back, which I got from Scrap and Stamp. All right, it's time to put that panel on. So we're just using some Tombow glue. This one is pretty flat. It'll be really good for sending out in the mail too. It's going down to some friends down in America because their Thanksgiving's coming up, and I thought it would be good to send to them. As I said, we're spreading a little kindness, right? On the inside, the leftover apple and apple slice and other cinnamon stick, we glued that on. Put a couple of embellishments, the enamel dots in green fields, and what was the other one? Red Cosmos on the front. On either side of the sentiment, it will draw your eye in. Think of them as old-fashioned corner tabs holding a photo in place. That was for the card at first, and then I went back in. I went, you know what? It doesn't have enough contrast. This is the other way you can step your cards up. So I brought in my alcohol markers. They will be fine with the normal inks. Don't use them on oxides. And that really gave it that much more richness and depth to it, don't you think? I was like, okay, now I'm a lot happier with it. And there's the finished card. No splatter, Minimal bling bling on it. Still very pretty. All right, you all go be that change you want to see in the world. I want to thank everybody that has been nice enough to sub and like and comment. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.